The dirt beneath her fingernails had turned black 3 days ago, and she had stopped trying to scrub it out. Elara knelt at the base of the old oak in the center of the Thornfield Pack Cemetery, her knees pressing into frozen November ground that smelled of wet bark and something older, something that tasted like pennies when she breathed through her mouth. Her hands moved mechanically, scooping earth into a hole no wider than a dinner plate, and inside the hole lay a small clay jar she had shaped herself in the pack's kiln when no one was watching. Inside the jar was everything she had left. Her wolf. Not literally. Not the way the elders spoke of wolves as though they were passengers riding shotgun in your skull. This was different. Elara had pulled the last threads of her wolf spirit out through her own chest 3 nights before, during the thinnest hour of the new moon, using a ritual she had found in a water-damaged book hidden behind a heating vent in the pack's unused library. The book had no title. Half the pages were in a language she could not read. But the diagram had been clear enough. A circle of salt, a clay vessel, a blade drawn across the palm, and the words spoken in the old tongue that essentially meant, "I release you." She pressed the lid onto the jar. The clay was cool and slightly damp against her bleeding palm. It should have hurt more than it did. That was the thought she kept circling back to. Losing your wolf was supposed to feel like losing a lung, like drowning on dry land. The old stories said wolves who were severed from their spirits went mad within a week, clawing at their own skin, howling without sound. But Elara felt only a strange lightness, the way you feel after vomiting when you have been sick for a very long time. Relief edged with emptiness. She had her reasons. The Thornfield Pack had never wanted her wolf. Beta Marcus had told her that, directly standing in the doorway of the supply shed where she slept on a cot that smelled of motor oil and mouse droppings, his shadow blocking the only light. "You are an abomination," he had said, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "Your mother was a rogue. Your father was nobody. Whatever is inside you is wrong, and everyone in this pack can feel it. The fact that you have a wolf at all is an insult to the moon goddess." That had been 2 years ago. Elara had been 16. She was 18 now, and she worked as the pack's sole mortuary attendant, the person who washed and prepared the dead for burial, who maintained the cemetery grounds, who kept the records of who lay where. It was a job no one else wanted, which made it the only job she could have. The dead did not care about her bloodline. The dead did not flinch when she walked past. She knew the weight of a grown wolf's body on a steel table, the specific resistance of skin when you closed a wound with stitching thread, the way rigor made fingers curl inward like fiddlehead ferns. She was good at it. That was the part nobody mentioned. Elara pushed the dirt back into the hole, packing it down with her fists. The clay jar disappeared beneath the earth. She placed a flat grey stone over the spot one she had taken from the creek bed, smoothed by decades of water. It looked like every other stone in the cemetery. No one would notice. No one would know. Without her wolf, she would register as fully human to any shifter who came near. No threat. No abomination. Just a quiet girl who smelled like formaldehyde and cedar shavings and nothing else at all. She stood. Her knees ached. There was blood on her dress, from the cut on her palm, blooming through the thin fabric like a small red flower, and she pressed her hand against her thigh to staunch it. The November wind cut through the cemetery, and she felt it in her teeth in the spaces between her ribs, where something warm used to live. That was 3 months ago. Now it was February, and Elara was elbow-deep in a steel basin, rinsing the body of old Harriet Crane, who had died in her sleep at 91, with the expression that looked almost amused when the door to the preparation room banged open and Councilwoman Vera marched in with her heels clicking on the concrete floor like a metronome set to furious, Ilara Vera said. Her voice was the kind of voice that made you check if you had done something wrong, even when you had not. Her platinum hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She wore a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, and she smelled the way she always did, like expensive hand cream and controlled irritation. "The Alpha King is arriving in 2 hours," Vera said. Ilara kept her hands in the water. She had learned not to react. Reactions invited attention, and attention invited pain. The delegation from the Ironmore pack, Vera continued looking around the preparation room with an expression that suggested she was cataloguing every surface for violations. King Kyle Voss. You have heard the name. Everyone had heard the name. Kyle Voss, Alpha King, of the Ironmore Dominion ruler of the 4 northern territories, the youngest Alpha to ever unite the mountain packs. There were stories about him that contradicted each other in every detail except one. He was not someone you wanted to notice you. "He is here for the territorial summit," Vera said. "Every pack in the eastern corridor is sending representatives. We are hosting, which means every corner of this compound needs to be presentable." Including, she looked at Ilara and then at old Harriet Crane lying peacefully on the steel table. This Ilara repeated. You Vera clarified. "You will be serving tonight at the welcome feast. We are short-staffed. You will carry trays. You will not speak. You will not make eye contact with any visiting Alpha. You will wear the grey uniform. You will tie your hair back. Am I clear?" It was not a question. Ilara nodded. Vera turned to leave, then paused. Her hand rested on the doorframe. For a moment, something moved behind her eyes, quick and complicated, like a fish turning beneath ice. She opened her mouth as though she was going to say something else. Then she closed it. 2 hours, she said, and left. Ilara looked down at old Harriet Crane. Harriet's amused expression hadn't changed. "I know," Ilara said to her. "I know." She finished Harriet's preparation in 40 minutes, stitching the small incision at the base of the throat with the neat, tiny sutures she had taught herself, applying the balm that prevented discoloration, combing Harriet's thin white hair with a gentleness she reserved entirely for the dead. Then she covered Harriet with a clean linen sheet, washed the basin, sterilized the tools, and went to the supply shed that served as her home to change. The grey uniform was folded on her cot. Someone had left it there while she was working. It was a size too large, which was fine. She had gotten thinner since burying her wolf. Without the spirit inside her, her metabolism had slowed, her appetite had dimmed. She ate when she remembered to. Her collarbone stood out like a shelf beneath her skin, and her wrists were narrow enough that the uniform cuffs slid down over her hands. She rolled them up twice and pinned them with safety pins she kept in a small tin beside her cot. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror mounted on the back of the shed door. Pale. Dark circles like thumbprints beneath brown eyes that used to have flecks of gold in them, but did not anymore. Hair the color of wet sand, pulled back into a knot. A thin scar running from her left eyebrow to her temple, where she had hit the edge of a table during a seizure the week after the burial ritual. The scar was still pink and slightly raised. She touched it without thinking. She did not look like someone who had once carried a wolf, powerful enough to make an entire pack uneasy. She looked like what she was, a mortuary attendant in a borrowed uniform, heading to carry trays for people who would not see her. Good, she thought. That was the point. The feast hall of the Thornfield compound was a long timber building with exposed beams and iron chandeliers that held real candles, because Alpha Gerald believed electric light was an affront to tradition. The result was that the hall was always slightly too dark and slightly too warm, thick with the smell of beeswax and roasted meat, and the competing perfumes of 40 wolves dressed in their finest. Elara moved through the crowd with a silver tray of wine glasses, balanced on her flat palm, keeping to the edges, keeping her eyes on the floor, keeping her breathing shallow. Without her wolf, she could not smell the pheromones that filled the room like weather systems, the dominance signals and submission cues and territorial markers that every other wolf navigated instinctively. She moved through the feast like a person walking through a rainstorm without feeling wet. She heard the Ironmore delegation before she saw them. The main doors opened and the sound in the hall changed, not quieter exactly, but compressed the way sound changes when the barometric pressure drops. Conversations continued, but at a lower register. Backs straightened, chins dipped. Even Alpha Gerald, who ruled Thornfield with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been seriously challenged, shifted his weight and stood a little taller behind the head table. Elara was refilling a glass at the far end of the hall near the kitchen entrance when she glanced up. She saw his men first, 8 of them enormous, moving in a formation that was technically casual, but read as a wall of muscle and controlled violence. They wore dark clothing without insignia, which was somehow more intimidating than uniforms would have been. Their faces were hard and watchful, and not one of them had touched the wine. Then the formation parted, and Kyle Voss walked through. He was not the tallest man in the room. That surprised her. She had expected a giant based on the stories. He was perhaps 6'2", broad through the shoulders and narrow at the waist, and he moved with a fluidity that made the space around him seem to warp slightly, as though gravity worked differently in his proximity. His hair was dark, almost black, cropped close at the sides and longer on top, and there was a scar that ran along his jawline, pale against skin the color of weathered oak. His eyes were the amber of old whiskey held up to firelight. He wore no crown, no jewelry. A dark Henley pushed to the forearms dark trousers boots that had seen actual mud. He looked like a man who had come from somewhere real, not from a throne room. There was dried clay under one of his thumbnails. She noticed that. She noticed things about hands. Alpha Gerald stepped forward with his arms spread wide, projecting warmth he did not feel. King Voss, Thornfield welcomes you. We are honored. Kyle Voss did not smile. He shook Gerald's hand with one firm motion and released it, and his eyes were already moving, scanning the hall with a systematic attention that made Elara think of the way she checked bodies for wounds she might have missed. He was reading the room, cataloguing exits, threats, power structures, all in the time it took Gerald to gesture toward the head table. Elara stepped back. She had been standing too long in one spot. She turned toward the kitchen tray tucked against her hip when she heard a sound that stopped her. It was barely a sound, more of a vibration, low and resonant, like a tuning fork struck against bone. It came from across the room, and it came from him. She did not turn around. She kept walking, but something in her chest, in the hollow place where her wolf used to sleep, flickered. A single pulse of heat there, and gone like a pilot light, catching for one instant before dying. She pushed through the kitchen door and set the tray down on the counter with shaking hands. No, she said, to herself, to the empty space inside her. No, because she knew what that flicker meant. Even without a wolf, even without the senses that would have made it unmistakable. She knew. She pressed her hands flat against the stainless steel counter. The metal was cold, real, grounding. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. The kitchen door swung open, and one of the other servers, a young wolf named Thomas, stuck his head in. "Hey, Gerald wants more wine at the head table. Now." Ilara nodded. She picked up a fresh tray. She did not allow her hands to shake. She walked back into the hall. Kyle Voss was seated at the head table beside Alpha Gerald, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested he was capable of explosive movement at any moment. A plate of food sat in front of him, untouched. Gerald was talking, gesturing broadly, and Kyle was listening with the patience of a man who was accustomed to being talked at and had learned to extract useful information from noise. Ilara approached the table from the left side, keeping her eyes on the glasses. She reached between two of the Ironmore guards to set down a fresh glass of wine in front of Kyle's place setting. His hand caught her wrist. Not roughly, not painfully, but with a completeness that made the rest of the room fall away, as though someone had turned the volume knob on reality down to 0. His hand was warm. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, exactly as though her bones had been measured and his grip had been made to fit. Ilara froze. Every cell in her body told her to pull away. Every survival instinct she had developed over 18 years of being invisible told her to keep her eyes down, to murmur an apology, to disappear. She looked up. Kyle Voss was looking at her the way she imagined astronomers looked at anomalies in the night sky, the way she herself looked at a body on her table that showed signs of something she had never seen before. Not with desire. Not yet. With recognition. With a fierce, almost painful attention. His amber eyes had darkened. The muscles in his jaw were tight. She could see his pulse in his throat, faster than it should have been for a man sitting still. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was low, with a rasp in it, like stone dragged over stone. Gerald stopped talking mid-sentence. The guards closest to Kale shifted their attention, snapping to Ilara with a predatory focus. "She is nobody," Gerald said quickly. "Just a server. One of our Omegas." Ilara released the king's wine and stepped back. Kyle didn't release her wrist. His thumb moved once over the thin skin where her pulse hammered. She knew he could feel it. She knew he was counting. "You smell," like he began and then stopped. His brow furrowed. "You smell like nothing." That was the first moment Ilara understood how thoroughly she had miscalculated. A wolf who smelled like nothing was not invisible. A wolf who smelled like nothing was a locked door, and Kyle Voss, she understood with a sickening clarity, was the kind of man who did not walk past locked doors. She pulled her wrist free. He let her. But the way he let her, slowly his fingers opening one by one, told her it was a choice, not a concession. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced being steady. "I apologize for the disturbance." She turned. She walked back toward the kitchen. She did not run. Behind her she heard Gerald saying something placating, and she heard Kyle Voss say nothing at all, which was worse. In the kitchen she set down the tray and pressed her back against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the tile floor with her knees drawn up to her chest. The tile was cold through the thin grey uniform. The kitchen smelled of garlic and rendered fat and the specific metallic tang of commercial dishwashing soap. The hollow in her chest pulsed again, warmer this time. Longer. She pressed her fist against her sternum hard, as if she could push it back down. Mate whispered something that was not quite a voice from the place where her wolf was buried. Ilara closed her eyes. She thought about the clay jar beneath the old oak. She thought about the flat grey stone she had placed over it. She thought about the word release, spoken 3 months ago in the thinnest hour. She thought about Kyle Voss's thumb moving across her pulse. "I released you," she said to the hollow. You are gone." The hollow did not answer. It just pulsed. Patient. Warm. Waiting. She stayed on the kitchen floor for 8 minutes. Then she stood, smoothed her uniform, and went back to work. The rest of the feast passed without incident, or rather without incident that anyone else would have noticed. Elara moved through the hall carrying trays, clearing plates, refilling glasses. She did not approach the head table again. She sent Tomas instead, but she could feel him. Without a wolf, without the heightened senses that came with a spirit, she should not have been able to feel anything. But she could. It was like standing near a space heater in a cold room, the awareness of warmth without touching the source. Every time she moved to a new part of the hall, the warmth shifted, tracking her. He was watching her. She caught it once directly. She was clearing a table near the east wall, and she looked up, without thinking the way you look up when someone says your name in a crowd, even when no one has, and he was looking straight at her, not turning his head to look. Already looking. His plate still untouched. Gerald still talking beside him. His amber eyes steady and dark and absolutely terrifyingly certain. She looked away first. After the feast, the visiting delegations were shown to their quarters in the guest wing. The Thornfield wolves dispersed to their homes. The kitchen staff cleaned in weary silence. Elara washed glasses until her fingers pruned, and then she washed them again. At 11, she walked back to the supply shed. The compound was quiet. The February sky was clear, and the stars were hard and white and very far away. Her breath made small clouds in front of her face. She could hear distantly the sound of the perimeter guards changing, shift their boots on frozen ground. She did not hear Cale Voss. He did not make a sound. He was leaning against the wall of the supply shed, arms crossed one boot, braced flat against the wood, and he was waiting for her, the way a predator waits at a waterhole, not with urgency, but with absolute confidence that what he was waiting for would come. Elara stopped. 10 feet between them. The security light above the shed door cast hard shadows across his face, deepening the scar along his jaw, turning his eyes into pools of dark gold. "You should not be here," she said. "I know," he said. His voice was different now. In the feast hall it had been formal, controlled. Here it was rougher, like he had been holding something between his teeth and had finally let go. "I should be in the guest wing reviewing Gerald's territorial proposal. Instead, I followed your scent." "I do not have a scent," Elara said. "No," he agreed. "You do not. That is what I followed. The absence of one. Do you have any idea how loud silence is in a room full of wolves?" She did not answer. He pushed off the wall and took one step toward her. Just one. His eyes moved over her face, her scar, her pulled-back hair, the uniform that hung on her thin frame. He was not looking at her the way men looked at women they found attractive. He was looking at her the way she looked at a body that told a story no one else had bothered to read. "You have calluses on your right hand from a specific kind of grip," he said. "Suturing needle. Your left thumbnail is cracked from the cold, but you haven't treated it. Your pupils reacted to me in the hall before your body did, which means your nervous system knows something your conscious mind is trying to ignore. You are underweight by at least 15 pounds. You sleep badly. You have buried something that is trying to come back." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. "I am a tracker," he said. "Not an emotional one, not instinct and mysticism and howling at the moon. I track. I read sign. And you." He took another step closer, "are the most interesting trail I have found in years." "With respect, Your Majesty," Elara said, and her voice only wavered on the last syllable. I am a mortuary attendant. I wash the dead. There is nothing interesting about me. Cale Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she did not expect. He smiled. Not a warm smile, a dangerous one. The kind of smile that said, I have been told a lie, and I am going to enjoy unraveling it. The dead do not make your hands shake, he said. I do. He turned and walked away. She listened to his boots on the frozen ground until the sound disappeared. Then she went inside the supply shed and locked the door and sat on her cot in the dark and pressed her palm against the hollow in her chest, where the warmth had not stopped pulsing since the moment he touched her wrist. She did not sleep. At 4 a.m, she put on her coat and walked to the cemetery. She knelt at the base of the old oak. The flat grey stone was where she had left it. She dug with her bare hands carefully until her fingers found the clay jar. She lifted it out and held it against her ear, the way you hold a seashell to hear the ocean. Nothing. Just clay. Just cold. But beneath the cold, beneath the silence, she could feel the faintest vibration. The kind of vibration you feel in your fillings when a truck passes on the road outside. Her wolf sleeping. Not dead. Sleeping. And she understood now with a dread that settled in her stomach like a stone beginning to dream. She put the jar back. She covered it. She replaced the stone. She went back to the shed and sat in the dark and waited for morning. The territorial summit was scheduled to last 5 days. On the first full day, Elara tried to be invisible. She reported to the mortuary at 6, prepared the last details for Harriet Crane's burial, attended the graveside service, where only 4 people came, shoveled dirt onto the casket, and returned to the preparation room to clean. She did not go near the main hall. She did not go near the guest wing. She ate a tin of sardines and 3 crackers for lunch, standing at the counter in the preparation room, because the kitchen was too close to where the delegations gathered. At 2 p.m, Beta Marcus appeared in the doorway of the preparation room. Marcus was a large man who had been handsome once and was now merely thick, his features blurred by years of easy living and moderate cruelty. He had a habit of standing in doorways blocking the light, and he did it with the casual authority of someone who had never been asked to move. "You have been summoned," he said. Elara set down her cleaning cloth. "By whom?" "The Alpha King. He has requested a tour of the pack grounds. He specifically asked for." And Marcus paused, and in the pause was a flicker of something she had never seen on his face before, something that might have been confusion, the cemetery attendant. Elara's stomach dropped. "Why?" Marcus shrugged, but the confusion was still there, a furrow between his brows that did not quite belong. "I would assume because he is unusual. The man asked Gerald about our burial customs over breakfast. Who asks about burial customs at breakfast? Go, do not embarrass us. Answer his questions." And Marcus added, as she moved past him, he looked at the scar on her temple with an expression she could not entirely read. "Be careful." It was the closest Marcus had ever come to saying something that sounded like concern, and it unsettled her more than the summons itself. She found Cale Voss waiting at the cemetery gate. He had 2 guards with him, both standing at a distance that suggested they had been told to stay back. He was crouched beside the low stone wall that bordered the oldest section of the cemetery, examining the lichen that grew on the capstones. He ran his finger along a pattern of growth with the focused attention of a man who found the natural world more interesting than the political one. He looked up when she approached. In daylight, his eyes were lighter, the amber turning almost gold at the edges. The scar on his jaw was a thin silver line. He looked younger than she had assumed. Late 20s, maybe. Not much older than her. "Thank you for coming," he said. And it was strange because he said it as though she had a choice, as though she could have refused a king. Beta Marcus said, "You wanted a tour," Ilara said. "I want to understand this place," he said. He stood. The lichen on the wall, the layout of the stones, the way the paths are worn. A cemetery tells you everything about a pack that the Alpha never will. She stared at him. Most wolves avoided cemeteries. Even the ones who buried their dead with elaborate ceremony preferred to do the burying and leave. The idea that someone would want to read a cemetery to study it was so far outside her experience that she did not immediately know how to respond. "This way," she said. She walked him through the cemetery for 2 hours. She did not know how it happened. She had intended to give him the basic tour, the kind she gave to visiting families, brief, efficient, impersonal. But he asked questions, specific questions, questions that required specific answers. Why are the older graves oriented east-west, but the newer ones are north-south? Because the pack changed tradition when Gerald's father took over. He believed the wolf spirit traveled north after death. Why is this section unfenced when the rest is walled? That is the rogue section. Unclaimed wolves. No pack protection in death because they had none in life. And you maintain that section too. Ilara hesitated. Yes, he looked at her. He did not ask why. He seemed to already know. She showed him the tool shed, where she kept her supplies, the specific arrangement she had developed over 2 years, the cleaning solvents organized by type, the grave markers she carved by hand, because the pack would not pay for a stonemason. He picked up one of the markers, a small rectangle of slate with a name etched in clean, precise letters, and turned it over in his hands. "You made this," he said. "Yes, the lettering is better than most professional work I have seen." "Who taught you?" "No one. I practiced on scrap wood." He set the marker down carefully, exactly where it had been. He looked at her hands. Then he looked at her face, at the scar on her temple, at the dark circles beneath her eyes. "When did you last eat a full meal?" he said. She blinked. "I eat." That was not my question. She did not answer. The silence between them stretched out, and it was not uncomfortable exactly, but it was loaded the way the air feels before a storm when the pressure changes, and you can feel it in your eardrums. "Come with me," he said. She should have said no. She should have excused herself, cited duties, retreated to the preparation room and the safe company of the dead. Instead, she walked beside him, back through the cemetery, past the old oak where a flat grey stone sat over a buried jar. And she did not look at the stone, and she did not look away from it either, because she was trying very hard to look at nothing at all. He took her to the pack kitchen, which was empty between meals. He sat her at the steel prep table and he cooked. The Alpha King of the Ironmore Dominion, ruler of the 4 northern territories, feared by every pack from the mountain ranges to the coast, stood in the Thornfield kitchen and made her an omelette. He moved through the kitchen with the same economy of motion he brought to everything, opening cabinets, finding pans, cracking eggs one-handed. He diced an onion with a knife technique that was practiced and precise. He found cheese in the walk-in cooler and herbs growing in a pot on the windowsill, and he used both. Ilara sat at the table and watched him, and did not know what to do with any of it. The omelette was perfect. Golden, slightly runny in the center, scattered with fresh thyme. He slid it onto a plate and set it in front of her with a fork and a glass of water, and then he sat across from her and watched her eat it. She ate slowly. The first bite was almost painful, the way it is when you have been under-eating for months, and real food hits your stomach like a small explosion. The eggs were rich and buttery. The cheese was sharp. The time tasted like the one good summer she remembered from childhood when her mother had still been alive, and they had grown herbs in clay pots on the windowsill of their small house. Her eyes burned. She did not cry. She ate. When the plate was clean, she looked up at him. "Why?" she said. He leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms. The posture was casual, but his eyes were not. "Because 3 months ago, something happened to you that should not have been possible, and I am trying to understand what you are," he said. "And because you are hungry, and that makes me angry, and I do not enjoy being angry before I understand why." Ilara set down her fork. The clatter was loud in the empty kitchen. "I am a mortuary attendant," she said again. It sounded less convincing the second time. "You are my mate," Cale Voss said, "and you have done something to yourself that I have only seen described in texts that are 3,000 years old, and I need you to tell me why before my wolf tears through my skin and digs up whatever you buried under that oak tree." The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the fluorescent light above the stove buzzing. "How do you know about the oak?" she whispered. "I told you," he said. "I am a tracker. And I have been tracking the absence of something since the moment I walked into that hall. Your scent is not missing. It is buried. I can feel it the way you feel a river running under stone. There is something under that tree that belongs inside you, and every minute it stays in the ground, my wolf gets closer to losing his mind." She stood up. The chair scraped back against the floor. "You do not understand," she said. And for the first time, her voice cracked. She had been holding it together for 3 months. 3 months of silence and discipline and the careful maintenance of emptiness, and this man had taken it apart in 2 days with an omelette and his terrible patient attention. "I buried it because they would have killed me. They were going to kill me. My wolf was." She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on the table. My wolf was wrong. Too strong. Too loud. They could feel it, and it frightened them, and Marcus said that if I did not find a way to suppress it, he would put me down like a feral. She was breathing hard. The hollow in her chest was burning now, not pulsing, burning, and she pressed her fist against it. "So I found a way," she said. "I found a ritual in an old book that no one knew existed, and I cut my wolf out of myself, and I buried her, and it worked. It worked. I am invisible now. I am safe. And you?" She looked at him, and her eyes were bright and fierce and terrified. "You are going to ruin everything." Cale Voss did not stand. He did not reach for her. He sat very still in his chair and looked at her with an expression she could not categorize, something between fury and grief, and a tenderness so controlled it was almost violent. "They threatened to kill you for being too strong," he said. "Yes. And you believed them. Marcus does not make empty threats." His jaw tightened. The scar along his jawline went white. She saw his hands grip the edge of the table, and she saw the table creak under the pressure. "What was your wolf, Ilara?" She shook her head. "What was your wolf?" She said nothing. He stood then. He moved around the table, and he stood in front of her close enough that she could smell him, pine resin and iron, and something warm underneath, like sun-baked stone. He did not touch her. He stood close, and he waited. "White," she said finally. "My wolf was white, with gold eyes. She was Ilara swallowed. She was larger than an alpha female, larger than most alpha males. The first time I shifted at 13, Beta Marcus measured my wolf against the pack. Alpha's, and mine was bigger. They measured again. Then they stopped measuring and started watching me the way you watch something you plan to get rid of." "A white wolf," Kyle said. His voice was very quiet. "I know what it means," Ilara said quickly. "I know what the old texts say. I do not care. It does not matter. I am not whatever they say. A white wolf is. I am an orphan who washes the dead. That is all." Kyle was looking at her with those amber eyes, and she could see behind the controlled exterior something enormous pressing outward. His wolf. She could not smell it without her own, but she could see it in the way the gold in his eyes expanded, swallowing the brown, in the way the air around him seemed to thicken with heat. "A white wolf with gold eyes," he said. "The moon lineage. Do you know how long the packs have been looking for the moon lineage? I am not the moon lineage. You are the moon lineage, and you buried your wolf under a tree because a beta threatened you, and I am standing in a kitchen having this conversation instead of tearing this compound apart, which is what my wolf has been begging me to do since I touched your wrist." He was shaking. She realized it with a start. Kyle Voss, the Alpha King, feared and obeyed, and immovable was shaking. His hands were clenched at his sides, and the muscles in his forearms were corded, and there was a fine tremor running through him, like current through a wire. "Please," he said, and the word came out rough, almost broken. "Let me bring her back." Ilara stepped away from him. Her back hit the counter. The steel was cold through her uniform. "You cannot," she said. The ritual was binding. It was the book said it was permanent. "No ritual is permanent," Kyle said. "Not for the moon lineage. The wolf is not dead. You said so yourself. She is buried. She is sleeping. And she is calling to my wolf right now, right this moment. And if you do not let me help you, I am going to lose control of him for the first time in my adult life." She stared at him. The burning in her chest was unbearable now. She pressed both hands against her sternum, and beneath her palms, she felt it. A heartbeat that was not hers. Faint, muffled by earth and clay, and 3 months of silence. But there. He reached out and took her hands, gently. He pulled them away from her chest and held them in his, and his hands were warm and steady, despite the trembling in the rest of him. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said, "and I need you to answer honestly. Not with what you think is safe. Not with what Marcus or Gerald or this pack has taught you to say. Honestly." She nodded. "Do you want her back?" The question hit her like a physical thing. She felt it in her knees, in her throat, in the place behind her eyes where tears lived. "Do you want her back? Not will you let me not? Should you not, is it wise? Do you want her?" She thought about the night she had knelt at the base of the old oak and cut her palm and spoken the word, release. She thought about the lightness that had followed the relief-edged emptiness. She had told herself it was freedom. She had told herself she was choosing survival. But she had also carved the jar herself. She had chosen clay that would not crack. She had placed the jar carefully, not thrown it. She had covered it with a stone, not with cement. And she had gone back at 4 in the morning, on the first night after meeting him, and she had held the jar to her ear. You do not bury something you want gone. You bury something you want to keep safe until you are ready to come back for it. "Yes," she said. Her voice broke on the single syllable. "Yes, I want her back." Kyle Voss closed his eyes. When he opened them, the amber was molten liquid gold, and his wolf was right behind them, looking at her through his eyes. "Show me the tree," he said. They went at midnight. Ilara led him through the compound in silence, past the darkened buildings, past the perimeter guard who saw the Alpha King, and said nothing past the cemetery gate and along the gravel path between the headstones. The February air was sharp enough to cut. The moon was waning a thin rind of silver above the tree line. Their breath made clouds. The old oak stood at the center of the cemetery like a sentinel. It had been there longer than the pack, longer than the town, longer than anything with a name. Its branches were bare in winter, black against the dark sky, and its trunk was wide enough that 3 people with arms spread could not encircle it. The bark smelled of tannin and cold sap, and the particular wet wood scent that old trees accumulate over centuries. "Here," Elara said. She knelt at the base of the trunk. She could feel the warmth of Kyle behind her, close, but not touching. She moved the flat grey stone and began to dig. The earth was harder now than it had been in November. The frost had gotten into it. Her fingers ached as she scraped the frozen dirt aside, and then Cale's hands were beside hers, larger, stronger, digging with a focus that was almost reverent. He did not use tools. He used his hands. They found the jar together. Elara lifted it from the earth. It was cold. The clay was damp. She held it in both hands and felt the vibration immediately stronger than it had been when she checked 3 nights ago. The wolf inside was not sleeping anymore. She was pressing against the walls of her container, not with force, but with a tension, the way a person presses their hand against a window when they see someone they recognize outside. Kyle placed his hand over hers on the jar. His warmth soaked through the clay. "I need you to understand something," he said. "When she comes back, she will be angry. Not at you. At the time, lost. 3 months is a long time for a wolf to be separated from her host. She may be disoriented. She may try to shift you immediately. I will be here." Elara looked at him. The moonlight caught the scar on his jaw, the gold in his eyes. He was kneeling in cemetery dirt at midnight, his hands over hers on a clay jar, and he looked more at ease than he had at any point during the summit. "What if she is too much?" Elara said. "What if Marcus was right and she is wrong, and dangerous, and too much for any pack to accept?" Kyle looked at her steadily. Then he said, "I am the Alpha King. There is no wolf in existence that is too much for my pack, and there is no version of you that is too much for me. Break the jar." She lifted the jar and she broke it against the root of the old oak. The clay shattered, and the night split open. There was no dramatic explosion, no beam of light, no thunderclap, no cinematic spectacle. What happened was quieter and more violent than any of that. A white vapor poured from the broken jar like smoke from a snuffed candle, thick and luminous, and it moved with purpose, curling through the air in a spiral that tightened as it rose, and then it hit Elara in the chest. She gasped, her back arched. She fell backward, and Kyle caught her, his arms around her, and she seized in his grip as the wolf spirit poured back into the hollow where it had lived for 18 years and been missing for 3 months. It was not gentle. It was not a homecoming. It was a breaking in. A door kicked open, a flood through a breach in the wall. She felt her wolf settle into her bones like fire setting in timber. She felt her senses expand the world, going from muted to overwhelming in a single heartbeat. She could smell everything: the tannin of the oak, the iron of the frozen earth, the beeswax from the distant hall, the specific scent of every headstone within 50 feet, mineral and lichen and rain and time, and she could smell him. Kyle Voss smelled like a forest after a lightning strike ozone and pine and charred wood, and underneath it all, underneath everything, the warm, clean scent of a wolf who had found what he was looking for. Her wolf rose inside her like a tide, not angry, not disoriented. Awake, furious in the way that a mother is furious when she has been kept from her child, in the way that a river is furious when a dam breaks. The fury was not rage. It was life rushing back into spaces that had been empty. Ilara opened her eyes. The world was different. The colors were deeper, the shadows layered the moonlight sharp as a blade. She could hear the perimeter guard's heartbeat 200 yards away. She could feel the earth beneath her knees, every grain of it, every frozen crystal. She looked at Kyle. Through her wolf's eyes, he was incandescent. Not literally, but something close. She could see his wolf behind his skin, pressing outward, enormous and dark, and his wolf was looking at her wolf with an expression that she could only describe as finally. Not possessive, not hungry, relieved, like a man who had been holding his breath for years and had just been told he could exhale. "There she is," Kyle said softly. Ilara opened her mouth. What came out was not a word. It was a sound low and resonant, a sound she had not made in 3 months, a sound that came from the place where her wolf lived, and it vibrated in her chest and in her throat and in the cold air between them. A howl. Not loud, not performative. A quiet howl, the way you might whisper the name of someone you thought you had lost. Kyle answered it. His howl rose from his chest and tangled with hers in the frozen air above the old oak, and the two sounds wound around each other like vines, like rivers meeting like two halves of a broken thing pressing back together. In the distance, wolves stirred. Lights came on. Kyle pulled her to her feet. She stood unsteadily, her body adjusting to the fullness of having her wolf back, the weight and warmth and sheer presence of it. She felt taller. She felt like a house that had been furnished again after standing empty. "Can you shift?" he asked. "I do not know." "Try." She tried. The shift was supposed to be voluntary, a conscious decision to let the wolf forward, to trade skin for fur, to reshape bone and muscle. She had done it exactly 4 times before the burial, each time in secret, each time briefly. This time, it was not voluntary. Her wolf did not wait for permission. The shift took her like a wave, and she went under. The pain was extraordinary and brief. She felt her bones rearrange, felt her spine extend, felt her hands become paws, and her jaw lengthen, and her skin prickle and then vanish beneath a coat of white fur so thick and luminous it seemed to generate its own light. She dropped to all 4s, and the world reshuffled itself around her new body, and she was big. She knew she was big. Her shoulder came to Cale's hip. Her paws pressed into the frozen earth, and each one left a print as wide as a dinner plate. Kyle was looking at her with an expression of open awe, which she suspected was not something many people had seen on his face. "Moon lineage," he murmured. He reached out and placed his hand on the top of her head, between her ears, and his fingers sank into the white fur, and she felt it through every nerve, a warmth that started at his palm and spread downward through her skull, her spine, her whole body. "You beautiful, impossible thing." She pressed her head against his hand. Her wolf made a sound that was something between a growl and a purr, deep and rumbling and content. The lights in the compound were coming on rapidly now. Voices carried across the cold air. Someone shouted. Someone else howled the sharp alarm howl of a perimeter guard. Kyle straightened. His expression shifted from tenderness to authority so quickly it was like watching a door close. "Shift back," he said. "They are coming." She shifted. The return to human form was easier, smoother, as though her wolf had remembered the mechanism and oiled the gears. She stood naked in the cemetery, the February cold hitting her bare skin, and Kyle pulled his dark Henley over his head and put it on her without a word. It smelled overwhelmingly of him. It fell to her mid-thigh. She pulled it down and wrapped her arms around herself. They came. Of course they came. Alpha Gerald arrived first, flanked by 4 of his enforcers, his face red from the cold and from the disruption to his sleep, and from the particular shade of fury that men like Gerald wore when something happened in their territory without their permission. Beta Marcus was behind him, his expression unreadable. Behind them, a growing crowd of Thornfield wolves, some in nightclothes, some half-shifted, all drawn by the howl that had rung through the compound like a bell, and among them pushing to the front with the sharp elbows and sharper expression that were her trademarks, Councilwoman Vera. What Gerald said is the meaning of this. He was looking at Elara. He was looking at her, standing in his cemetery, wearing the Alpha King's shirt, and the calculation happening behind his eyes was visible even in the dark. Kyle stepped forward. He did not step in front of Elara. He stepped beside her. "This woman is my mate," he said. His voice carried the way a drum carries, low and resonant and impossible to ignore. It was not a feast hall voice. It was a battlefield voice. "She is the Moon lineage. She has been living in your pack as a servant, sleeping in a supply shed, eating scraps, while carrying one of the rarest wolf spirits in recorded history. And she buried that spirit in the ground 3 months ago, because your beta he looked at, Marcus, threatened to kill her for being too powerful. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the kitchen. This silence had teeth. Elara could feel the Thornfield wolves processing what they had heard, the shock and confusion, and beneath it, the slow, dawning recognition that they had made a catastrophic mistake. Gerald recovered first. He was a politician. Recovery was what he did. "We had no idea," he began. "You had every idea," Kyle said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "A white wolf. A wolf larger than your pack, Alpha. A girl whose presence made your entire pack uneasy. You knew exactly what she was, and instead of protecting her, you gave her to the dead and looked the other way." Gerald's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Marcus. Marcus, who had stood in doorways and blocked the light, who had measured Elara's wolf and spoken the word abomination with the casual tone of a man ordering lunch, looked at the ground. But then Marcus spoke, and what he said surprised everyone, including himself. "He is right," Marcus said. His voice was flat, exhausted. "I told myself she was dangerous. I told myself I was protecting the pack. But I measured that wolf, and I was afraid of it, and I was afraid of her, and fear is not the same thing as duty." He looked up. He looked directly at Elara, and in his eyes there was not remorse, exactly because Marcus was not built for remorse. But there was a recognition, a reckoning. "I owe you a debt I cannot pay," he said. "I know that." Elara stared at him. In all the scenarios she had imagined, Marcus admitting fault had not been among them. She did not know what to do with it. She filed it away in the place where she kept complicated things, next to the feeling of Cale's thumb on her pulse and the sound of her wolf howling for the first time in months. "There will be a formal accounting," Kyle said. He looked at Gerald. "Your pack's treatment of a Moon lineage wolf is a violation of the old accords. There are consequences." Gerald's face was the color of ash. The old accords were not a set of rules anyone had invoked in living memory. They were the deep law, the foundational agreements between the original packs, and their consequences were severe. However, Kyle continued that accounting will wait until after the summit. "I did not come here for justice. I came here for territorial agreements, and I intend to complete that work. But when I leave," he looked at Elara, "she comes with me." Elara felt the words land in her chest in the place where her wolf had curled up, warm and awake, and listening. If she chooses to, Kyle added, and the addition was quiet, almost an afterthought. But she heard it. She heard the if. The crowd shifted. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. Gerald looked like he wanted to argue, but had calculated the odds and found them unfavorable. Vera, standing behind him, had her arms crossed, and her expression was complicated, layered with something that was not anger and was not satisfaction, and might have been, if Ilara squinted, a kind of grim vindication. "Everyone," Cale said, "go back to bed." They went. Over the next 3 days, Ilara existed in 2 worlds simultaneously. There was the world of the summit, where she continued her work in the mortuary, because the dead still needed tending, regardless of politics, or mate bonds or destiny. And there was the world that formed in the spaces between the hours she spent with Cale, walking the cemetery, sitting in the kitchen, talking with a frankness she had never experienced with another living person. He told her about the Ironmore territories, about the mountain packs and their stubborn traditions, about the political work of holding 4 territories together, about the loneliness of authority. He told her about his parents, who had died when he was 19 in a border skirmish that should have been avoided, and about the 2 years after their death, when his wolf had been so wild with grief that he had exiled himself to the northern woods and lived as a wolf for months at a time. "I ate raw rabbit," he said. "I slept in dens I dug with my own paws. I howled at nothing. It was the most important time of my life because it taught me that control is not the absence of wildness. It is the choice to be wild in service of something." Ilara told him about her mother, who had been a rogue, a wolf, without a pack, who had stumbled into Thornfield territory, pregnant and bleeding, and been taken in by Gerald's father, out of either mercy or calculation. Her mother had died when Ilara was 7, a fever that the pack healer had treated too slowly, whether by negligence or design, Ilara had never been able to determine. She told him about the years after sleeping in the supply shed, learning to make herself small, learning the dead, because the dead were the only company the pack would permit her. She told him about the ritual, about the book with no title, the water-damaged pages, the diagram she had followed in the thinnest hour. She told him about cutting her palm and speaking the word release and feeling her wolf drain from her body like water from a cracked glass. It did not feel like dying, she said. It felt like sending someone I loved to a place where they could not be hurt. They were sitting on the stone wall at the edge of the cemetery. It was the 3rd day. The afternoon light was thin and gold, and their breath made clouds that tangled together above them. Kyle was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know what you are?" "Yes." "You know what the moon lineage means?" "Yes." She paused. "My mother told me before she died. She said the moon lineage was the original bloodline, the wolves closest to the source. She said every few generations one is born, and the packs either worship them or destroy them, and there is very little in between. And you chose a 3rd option," Kyle said. "You disappeared." Ilara looked at her hands, the calluses from the suturing needle, the cracked thumbnail, the scar from the clay jar she had broken 3 nights ago, already healing faster than it should have, the wolf spirit accelerating her body's repair. "I chose survival," she said. He reached over and took her hand. He held it the way he had held the slate grave marker, carefully, with attention to its specifics. "You chose a 4th option now," he said. "You came back." On the 4th day, the rival arrived. Her name was Selene. She was the daughter of the Ashfall Pack Alpha, and she had been promised to Kyle Voss through a political arrangement that Kyle had neither agreed to nor formally rejected, because rejecting it would have destabilized the Northern Alliance, And Kyle was above all things, a pragmatist. Selene arrived at midday in a black SUV with tinted windows. She was tall, dark-haired, built like a weapon sheathed in silk, and she walked into the Thornfield compound as though she owned it. She smelled Ilara noted with her newly restored senses of sandalwood and cold steel and ambition. Ilara was in the preparation room when she heard the commotion. She set down her tools and went to the window, and she watched Selene embrace Kale in the courtyard with the practiced ease of a woman who had rehearsed the gesture. Kale did not embrace her back. His arms stayed at his sides, but he did not push her away either, and the distinction between not embracing and pushing away was vast enough to drive a truck through. Ilara closed the window. She went back to work. That night, Selene attended the summit dinner. She sat beside Kyle at the head table in the seat that had been empty for 3 nights, and she touched his arm when she spoke and leaned close to whisper things that made the nearby wolves glance at each other with knowing expressions. She was performing a role, and she performed it beautifully, and every wolf in the hall understood exactly what was being communicated. Ilara served. She carried trays. She kept her eyes on the floor. But her wolf was awake now, and her wolf didn't care about politics or pragmatism or survival strategies. Her wolf saw a female touching their mate and responded with a low, continuous growl that vibrated in Ilara's chest like an engine idling in a locked car. She gripped the tray harder, the metal bit into her palms. Thomas, the young server, appeared beside her. "You okay?" "Fine," she said. "Your eyes are gold," he said. "Like actually gold." "Just..." He glanced around nervously, "thought you should know." Ilara ducked into the kitchen. She pressed her hands over her eyes. When she took them away and looked at her reflection in the surface of a pot, her irises were brilliant gold, the color of her wolf's eyes, burning through her human face. "Stop it," she whispered to her wolf. "Not now. Not here," her wolf growled. The kitchen door opened. Ilara did not turn around. "You are the servant," said a voice like polished marble. "Selene." Ilara turned. Selene stood in the doorway, a glass of red wine in one hand, her posture casual and regal simultaneously. Up close, she was stunning, the kind of beauty that was assembled deliberately, each feature maintained and highlighted with precision. She had dark eyes that were intelligent and watchful and not warm. "The servant with the interesting wolf," Selene said. She sipped her wine. "Kyle has been distracted since he arrived. I was curious what the distraction looked like." She tilted her head. "You are not what I expected." "I am nobody," Ilara said. The old reflex. Selene smiled. "No," she said. "You are not nobody. Nobody does not make the Alpha King cook omelettes. I have people who report to me," she added before Ilara could ask. "I know about the cemetery tours. I know about the broken jar. I know about the moon lineage." She said the words moon lineage, the way you might say a particularly interesting chess move made by an opponent you respected. "I came here to cement an alliance," Selene said. "The Ashfall Ironmore Pact. It has taken 2 years to negotiate. It would stabilize the entire northern region. It requires, among other things, a mating bond between Kyle and myself." Ilara said nothing. Selene looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something Ilara absolutely did not anticipate. She set down her wine glass, pulled out a chair, and sat down at the kitchen table. "I am going to tell you something that no one in my pack would believe," Selene said. "I do not want to mate Kale Voss. I never have. He is extraordinary, and I respect him enormously, and the thought of being bound to him for life makes me want to drink this entire bottle and walk into the woods. I want to lead my own pack, I want to be an alpha in my own right, not a lunar standing behind someone else's throne. She picked up her wine again. She swirled it. But the alliance is necessary, she said. The border conflicts are getting worse. People are dying. And my father believes a mating bond is the only guarantee that will hold. So here I am in my best dress, performing my role, because that is what people like us do. We perform. She looked at Elara. Why are you telling me this? Elara asked. Because I need you to understand that when I do what I am about to do, it is not personal, Selene said. She stood. She straightened her dress. She looked at Elara with those dark, intelligent eyes, and there was something in them that might have been, in another life, the beginning of respect. Then she walked back into the feast hall, and Elara heard her voice, clear and carrying, announce to the assembled delegations that the Ashfall Pack was invoking the right of first claim. The ancient law that stated a politically arranged bond superseded a fated one, if the fated bond had not been formally marked. The hall erupted. Elara stood in the kitchen. She heard shouting. She heard the sound of chairs, scraping of wolves, growling of Gerald's voice, trying to restore order. She heard Kyle's voice, once cutting through the noise like a blade through fabric, one word. No. And then a sound she had never heard before. A roar. Not a human sound, and not entirely a wolf sound. Something older, something that came from the place where Alpha authority lived, the deep well of power that separated kings from common wolves. The roar shook the glasses on the kitchen shelves. It vibrated in the walls. It made Elara's wolf press flat against her consciousness in automatic submission, not from fear, but from recognition. She ran into the hall. Kyle had shifted. Partially. His body was caught between forms larger than human. His features sharpened, his eyes fully. Wolf, and he was standing between Selene and Gerald, with his claws extended and his chest heaving. His guards were on their feet, hands on weapons facing outward. The Thornfield wolves had backed against the walls. The other delegations were frozen. Selene stood her ground. To her credit, she did not retreat. She looked at Kyle with an expression that was part calculation and part genuine fear and part something else, something that looked almost like admiration. The right of first claim is law, she said. Her voice was steady. It predates the fated bond tradition by centuries. Deny it, and you deny the accords you invoked yesterday. She was right. Elara could see it in the faces of the assembled wolves, the older ones, especially the ones who knew the old laws. Selene had trapped him with his own principles. Kyle's claws retracted. His body pulled back toward human. He stood in the hall with his torn Henley and his amber eyes blazing, and he looked at Selene with an expression that was impossibly something close to respect. "You planned this," he said. "I had to," Selene said. "The alliance matters. The people who will die in the border wars matter. You know this." Kyle looked across the hall. He found Elara standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing the grey uniform, her gold eyes burning in her pale face. He looked at her, the way he had looked at her that first night, with recognition, with that fierce and terrible attention, and she saw in his face the thing she had feared most. Not anger, not defiance. Doubt. The doubt of a king who had spent his life weighing duty against desire, and had always chosen duty. Elara felt her wolf howl inside her, soundless, frantic. She did not wait for him to speak. She could not bear to hear him choose. She turned and ran. She ran through the compound, past the buildings, past the supply shed, past the cemetery gate. She ran to the old oak. She did not know why. Instinct. The place where she had buried the only thing she had ever loved, the place where it had been returned to her. She pressed her back against the trunk, and she slid down, and she sat in the dirt, and she pressed her hands against her chest, and she felt her wolf raging and grieving inside her, and she thought I should never have broken the jar. I should have stayed empty. Empty does not break. She did not know how long she sat there. Long enough for the cold to numb her feet, long enough for the stars to shift. She heard footsteps, not Cale's. These footsteps were lighter, faster, accompanied by the click of heels on the gravel path. Vera. Councilwoman Vera appeared between the headstones like a ghost in charcoal, her platinum hair silver in the moonlight, her face set in an expression that Ilara had never seen on it before. Vera looked tired, not the performative tiredness of someone who wanted sympathy, but the deep structural tiredness of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Get up," Vera said. Ilara stared at her. I said, "Get up." Vera's voice was sharp, but the sharpness was different now, the sharpness of urgency rather than authority. "You need to hear something, and I need to say it, and neither of us has time for you to sit in the dirt feeling sorry for yourself." Ilara stood. "Slowly," your mother Vera said. She paused. She pressed her lips together. She looked away at the headstones, at the names carved in slate. "Your mother was not a rogue. She was my sister." The words landed like stones in still water. "She came to Thornfield because I was here," Vera continued. "I was already on the council. I had power. She thought I could protect her. She was moon lineage like you, and our birth pack had discovered what she was, and she ran. She came to me, and Vera stopped. Her jaw clenched. I told Gerald's father the truth because I thought honesty would earn protection. Instead, he saw an opportunity. A moon lineage wolf in his pack, leverage, power. He took her in, and he watched her. And when she got pregnant, he watched harder. Vera's hands were fists at her sides. When she died, she said her voice was flat, controlled, a dam holding back a flood. I did not fight for you. I should have. I told myself it was safer to keep my distance, that revealing our connection would make us both targets. I rationalized it. I was good at rationalizing. I watched you grow up in that shed, and I told myself you were strong enough to survive. And I watched Marcus threaten you, and I said nothing, because saying something would have cost me my position. And I valued my position more than my niece. Ilara was shaking. Not from cold. I am telling you now, Vera said, because Selena's claim is not unbreakable. The right of first claim has an exception. It does not apply if the fated mate is of royal blood. Moon lineage is royal blood, the oldest royal blood. You outrank every wolf in that hall, including Cale Voss. Ilara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I have the documentation, Vera said. Your mother's birth records, the lineage charts. I have kept them in a locked drawer in my office for 18 years. I was keeping them safe, I told myself. I was being strategic. The truth is, I was a coward, and I am still a coward, but I am done being a coward at your expense. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, old yellowed at the edges, held together with a clip that had gone rusty. She held them out. Ilara took them. The papers were warm from Vera's body heat. She unfolded the top sheet, and in the moonlight she could make out the heading written in the formal script of the old packs. Lineage certification, it read. Verified by the Lunar Council. Subject Lyra of the Moon Pack. Classification Moon Lineage Direct Descent. Offspring unnamed female born. The date was Ilara's birthday. She looked up at Vera. Vera was looking at the old oak. Her eyes were bright. She blinked rapidly. "Go back to the hall," Vera said. Her voice was thick. "Show them who you are." Ilara held the papers against her chest. She looked at Vera, at this woman who had been cold and sharp and demanding for 18 years, who had let her live in a shed and wash the dead and bury her own wolf, who was standing in a cemetery at midnight, with tears she would not shed and a truth she had finally spoken. "Thank you," Ilara said. Vera shook her head. "Do not thank me. I do not deserve it. Go." Ilara went. She walked back to the feast hall. She walked through the main doors. She walked in wearing the grey uniform and carrying the yellowed papers, and her eyes were gold, and her wolf was burning inside her like a furnace. The hall was still in chaos. Selena stood at one end of the head table, composed, her case made. Gerald stood behind her, supporting her claim, because an Ashfall alliance was worth more to him than anything Ilara could offer. Marcus stood to the side, silent, his face unreadable. Kyle stood alone, his fists on the table, his head bowed, and he looked like a man preparing to do something that would hollow him out. The delegates were arguing. The old laws were being cited, debated, twisted. Ilara walked to the center of the hall. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her wolf raised it for her. The sound that came from her chest was not a howl, and not a roar, and not a word. It was a resonance, the same resonance she had felt through the clay jar, amplified now through her restored wolf and her royal blood, and 18 years of silence breaking all at once. The sound filled the hall, the way water fills a vessel completely, leaving no room for anything else. Every wolf in the room went silent. Not by choice, by compulsion. The old authority, the moon lineage authority, the power that predated packs and alphas and kings, pressed down on the hall like a hand. Ilara held up the papers. "My name is Ilara," she said. "My mother was Lyra of the Moon Pack. My lineage is verified by the Lunar Council. I am moon lineage direct descent, and the right of first claim," she looked at Selene, "does not apply to royal blood." Selene stared at her. Then Selene closed her eyes, and what crossed her face was not defeat. It was relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief, like a woman who had been holding up a ceiling and had finally been told she could set it down. "Well," Selene said. She opened her eyes. She looked at Kale. "I believe that settles the matter." Her voice was dry, almost amused. "I trust we can negotiate the Ashfall alliance through conventional means." Kale Voss lifted his head. He looked at Ilara standing in the center of the hall with her yellowed papers and her burning eyes, and her too large grey uniform, and the expression on his face was not surprise, because she suspected he had never quite believed she was nobody from the very first moment he had touched her wrist. He walked to her. He walked through the hall past the delegates, past Gerald, past Marcus, past Selene, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and her wolf met his wolf behind their eyes, and the bond between them locked into place with an audible sound, a deep, resonant click that every wolf in the hall felt in their sternum. "Ilara," he said. His voice was rough. "Will you let me?" "Yes," she said. She tilted her head. She exposed the left side of her neck, the soft skin below the jaw, the place where the pulse was strongest. He lowered his mouth to her throat. His lips touched her skin, first warm, and she shivered. Then his teeth. The bite was sharp and deep and bright, and it felt nothing like pain. It felt like the opposite of burying. It felt like being unearthed. Her wolf howled. His wolf answered, and every wolf in the Thornfield Feast Hall felt the bond seal, like a door closing against a storm final, and solid and absolute. When Kyle pulled back, there was blood on his lips and blood on her neck, and the mark was already healing into a silver crescent that would never fade. He pressed his forehead against hers. His eyes were gold. Hers were gold. They stood in the center of the hall with their foreheads touching, and their wolves twined together in the space behind their heartbeats. And he said nothing, because some things did not require words. The hall was silent. Then Thomas, the young server, started clapping. He was the only one for a long, awkward moment. Then someone else joined. Then another. Then the hall broke open into something that was not quite cheering and not quite weeping, but had elements of both. Gerald stood behind his table and did not clap and did not speak, and looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was not as solid as he had believed. Marcus clapped, slowly, deliberately. And when Alara looked at him, he inclined his head, once the formal gesture of acknowledgement, and then he stepped back into the crowd and let himself disappear, which was a thing she suspected he was learning to do for the first time. Selene caught Alara's eye across the hall. She raised her wine glass just slightly, and the ghost of a smile crossed her face before she turned and walked away, already pulling out her phone, already making calls, already building the next version of the alliance that did not require her to surrender herself. The summit ended 2 days later. The territorial agreements were signed. The Ashfall alliance was restructured around trade and military cooperation rather than a mating bond, which Selene negotiated herself with a ferocity that made even Cale's advisors nervous. Gerald signed the documents that submitted Thornfield to a formal review. Under the old accords, his hand steady, his face grey. Vera did not attend the signing. She was in her office clearing out her desk. She had submitted her resignation from the council that morning. When Alara found her, Vera was packing the last of her things into a cardboard box. The locked drawer was open and empty. "You do not have to leave," Alara said. "Yes," Vera said. "I do." She picked up the box. She looked around her office one last time. "I have a great deal of time to make up for." "Not to you," she added before Alara could speak. "You have already given me more grace than I earned. I mean to myself. I forgot who I was for 18 years. That is a long time to be lost." She walked past Alara. At the door she paused. "Your mother," she said. "Her name meant light. She would have been proud of you, not for the wolf or the lineage or the title, for the fact that you buried something precious to keep it safe, and you had the courage to dig it up again." She left. On the morning of departure, Alara walked through the cemetery one last time. She checked the headstones she had maintained, the path she had kept clear, the record she had updated. She stopped at Harriet Crane's fresh grave and straightened the marker she had carved. She stopped at the rogue section and ran her hand along the unfenced border. She stopped at the old oak. The flat grey stone was still there. The hole where the clay jar had been was visible, a shallow depression in the earth. Shards of clay lay scattered among the roots, pale against the dark soil. Alara knelt. She gathered the largest shards and placed them in her pocket. She would keep them, not as a reminder of what she had lost, but as proof of what she had survived. She stood. She brushed the dirt from her knees. Kyle was waiting by the gate. Behind him, the Ironmore convoy was assembled, dark vehicles with their engines running. His guards stood at attention. The breath of the idling engines and the idling men made a cloud that hung in the February air. He did not ask if she was ready. He looked at the dirt on her knees and the clay shards in her pocket. and he understood the way he had understood everything, not through explanation, but through attention. They drove north for 6 hours. The landscape changed, flattening out, and then rising, the trees growing taller and darker pines, replacing the bare, deciduous forest. The air through the cracked window smelled of snow and resin and altitude. Kyle drove the lead vehicle himself. Ilara sat beside him. She had her feet on the dashboard, which one of his guards had politely suggested was inappropriate for a queen designate. And Kyle had told the guard that the queen designate could put her feet wherever she wanted. She watched the road. The hollow in her chest was not hollow anymore. It was full warm, occupied by a white wolf who was curled up and content, and occasionally pressed a paw against her ribs, just to remind her she was there. They reached the Ironmore territory at dusk. The compound was not what she expected. She had imagined a fortress, something dark and imposing. Instead, it was a cluster of timber buildings set into a mountainside, surrounded by old-growth pine, with smoke rising from chimneys and lights in the windows, and the sound carrying through the cold air of a child laughing. Kyle parked the vehicle. He got out. He walked around to her side and opened her door and stood there, waiting. Ilara looked at the compound. She looked at the smoke and the lights and the mountains rising behind them, dark against the last light of the day. She got out of the vehicle. The cold hit her face, and it smelled different here. Pine and wood smoke and stone, and the faint mineral tang of a nearby hot spring. Her wolf stirred, interested. Kyle held out his hand. She took it. They walked toward the main building. The door opened before they reached it. People inside. Warmth pouring out. The smell of bread baking and coffee, and something roasting with rosemary. Kyle stopped at the threshold. He looked at her. The light from inside caught his face, warming the amber of his eyes, softening the scar along his jaw. "Welcome home," he said. Ilara stepped inside. The warmth closed around her like a hand. In the weeks that followed, she would learn the compound, its rhythms and its people. She would set up a small mortuary, because even mountain packs needed someone who knew how to tend the dead, and she found that the Ironmore wolves treated her work with a respect she had never experienced, coming to her with questions about their ancestors, asking her to read the old cemetery on the mountainside and tell them what the stones said. She would discover a library that took up an entire floor of the East Building, with books in languages she was still learning, and in one corner on a shelf that smelled of dust and binding glue, she would find a book with no title and water-damaged pages, the twin of the one she had used in Thornfield, and she would sit with it for hours reading the passages she could now understand. She would learn that Kale woke at 5 every morning and ran the mountain trails in wolf form. She would learn that he had a scar on his back from shoulder to hip that he had never told anyone about. She would learn that he kept a collection of stones from every territory he had united, arranged on a shelf in his study by date, and that he picked them up and held them when he was thinking. She would learn that when he slept, his hand found her wrist in the dark, and his fingers rested on her pulse, and he counted her heartbeats the way some people counted sheep. But that first night, the night of their arrival, Ilara stood in the main hall of the Ironmore compound and felt the warmth and smelled the bread and heard the laughter, and her wolf pressed against her ribs gently, and she pressed her hand against her chest in return. "I know," she said. "I know." Outside, the wind moved through the old pines, and far below in a cemetery, she would not return to a flat grey stone sat over an empty hole at the base of an oak tree that had stood for centuries, and would stand for centuries, more patient and silent, keeping watch over the place where something precious had been buried, and against every expectation had been dug up again.